Do you want to save the West? Do you want to do something about whatever is bringing down the West? You can do that. You can be a man amongst the ruins, as this promotional video says. Promotion for Generation Identity. You can march along the not-so ruins of a city, throw paper into an empty square, and do other silly things that apparently save you. Now, saving is kind of a cult leader's catch, a con man's tactic. It's easy to wrap some fool around your fingers by promising to save them, when in fact they only need to be saved from the ones supposedly doing the saving. But this might be the real deal. Look at how many popular online personalities and political commentators have so far embraced these saviors. Generation Identity takes care of its image, like no other far-right organization does. Sleek and stylish in its online presence, trying its best to imitate the sincerity and serious appearance of any political movement. But its appearance elsewhere is so facile and obvious, it is amazing people fall for it. Boys with lesbian haircuts with bleach blonde girls are more of a laughing matter in comparison to the gruffy, sinister appearance on the streets, the symbols, the flags, the uniformity, the militaristic organizational structure. It's amazing how people apparently watch all this and do not immediately think, yeah, this kind of looks like a bunch of fascists. This looks like Mussolini's black shirts. And despite all that, Generation Identity has managed to find a whole lot of people willing to lend them support. The left is the real problem. We have to oppose Islam together. We have to keep fighting the SJWs. I guess this might be due to the lip service paid by Generation Identity's leaders and mouthpieces to a supposed common set of democratic standards and values, constantly reassuring everyone in statement after statement that theirs is not an anti-democratic movement, but a movement operating within the limitations and boundaries of a free and democratic society. But how true is this? The underlying problem with Generation Identity, how it became this self-styled, merely conservative and traditionalist movement in the English-speaking sphere of politics and political commentary, is really simple. It's the fact that nobody outside of Germany bothers learning German, not even now that Generation Identity has been shown ties to recent terrorist attacks in New Zealand. This is a movement that has been around for almost a decade. There's an established record of its conduct, which happens though to be in French and German. The record shows exactly who they are, how they conduct themselves, and what their ultimate goals are. And nobody should be surprised by what happened in New Zealand and its ties to that organization. One of the founders and by far one of the biggest ideological influencers of the identitarian movement is the far-right German commentator Götz Kubitschek, who wrote about their goals. Our goal is not to take part in the discourse, but to end it as a consensus, not to join a conversation, but a different language, not to stand in the parlor, but to end the party. And this spills it out, black on white. There's no intention whatsoever to take part in the civilized discourse that makes our society what it is. There's zero intention whatsoever to actually take part in the democratic process, to be limited by its rules, as are all participants within it, but to disrupt it and destroy it, to by all means necessary destroy the very things they use like makeup to proclaim to save. This is reflected in the activities and actions of this movement. They're not intended to start conversation. They're not intended as a participation within society, but as a gradual disruption and destruction of it. A short while ago in Germany, members of Generation Identity stormed a discussion hosted at a university. The narrative being clearly mapped out. These leftist academics didn't let us speak, therefore we are being censored. However, what happened was that the professors invited them onto the stage to take part in the debate. And this is where something very telling and revealing happened. Members of Generation Identity, present at the event and dressed up as security guards, play-acted kicking them out of the lecture hall while its members kept filming. There was an intention of being censored, or at the very least to pretend to be censored. They wanted to disrupt and at the same time artificially create a victim narrative with them at center stage. And most telling of all is that this was done during something that is essential to the functioning and conduct of a free society: debate, discourse, an exchange of ideas, the very foundation of how we decide to conduct ourselves within our society. In discourse and conversation online, the intentions of this movement to destroy rather to take part in the social discourse and the political process have also been blatantly laid bare. Manuals on online guerrilla warfare spread in their group chats and online communities leaked to the public, revealing how this organization instructs its members to conduct themselves online, disrupt conversation, shut down conversation, intimidate people, gather their personal information, blackmail them off the internet by using their personal information against them through impersonation and other means. And these anti-democratic behaviors and tendencies shine through the cracks that ever so often form to reveal the true fascistic nature of this movement. Its leader referred to Holocaust memorial services in Germany as cults of guilt conducted by the Holocaust religion, and also stated that the Jewish question was no longer an issue since the end of the Second World War, which really can only be interpreted as that after the systematic murder of most of Europe's Jews, there isn't a need to murder Jews, and that in his mind there must have been some sort of justification for the Holocaust. I am sure any Jews watching this will be happy to know that today's most prominent fascist believes that enough of you have been murdered. When I lived in Bavaria, generation identity kept continuously popping into the regional news due to the continuous harassment of the Dachau community, and nobody has yet been able to give a satisfactory answer to the questions that this kind of behavior poses. If this is just some traditionalist conservative movement concerned with immigration from non-European countries, why dabble in anti-Semitism? Why relativize the Holocaust? What on earth does any of this have to do with changing immigration policy? The cracks that reveal true intentions behind this movement are often opened by almost childish mistakes committed by leading members of this movement. People who organize protests and city cells have been caught attending Nazi skinhead marches, posted pictures of themselves wearing shirts of Nazi metal bands, attended fascist rallies in Italy, or even more embarrassingly posted images of house parties on their social media revealing a giant Nazi flag just casually hanging in the living room. Most people would say that what is represented with this flag goes against any semblance of democratic values and principles. Or maybe this is just a democratic swastika, a constitutional SS rune, and the free speech death's head. The biggest lie, however, is the claim of non-violence. The record of violent crime committed by this organization goes back to its infancy, when in 2011 members of Generation Identity were arrested in France for murder. Over several weeks they had planned and then executed the murder of a member of a French punk band, who they beat half dead and threw off a bridge into a river to drown. This murder also caught the attention of other investigations. In the year leading up to this political assassination, 4 men had been brutally murdered in the exact same way, in the exact same place. The police had mistakenly assumed the gay serial killer was responsible, and even though no criminal charges were leveled, it's assumed that these men were murdered by members of Generation Identity. And the tendency to violence has continued throughout recent years, from a vehicular hit-and-run attack against a German police officer, physical assaults against political activists, to storming a university armed with knives and threatening students. There are frequent accounts and reports of crimes committed by this organization within the German media that seem to simply fly beneath the radar in the English-speaking countries where this organization is now trying to establish itself. The pattern by which it engages within society has more in common with how a mafia spreads into a town than any political movement, let alone group or party, moving into a town, establishing a shared house, and then harassing and terrorizing the people in the neighborhood. neighborhood. An example being the German town of Halle, where it created a cell engaged in its activities that ended up with a police raid, several arrests, and the criminal investigation into 2 counts of dangerous bodily harm, vandalism, trespassing into private property, illegal use of explosives, disorderly assembly, violent threats, verbally assaulting law enforcement, ownership of illegal weapons, theft, and assaulting the police. When you read this arrest report, you would think of it being a gang of crooks being arrested and having an end put to their criminal activity, rather than any sort of political organization. And this violence, the intention to physically harm those who oppose them, is by no means a set of isolated incidents committed by misguided individuals, but deeply ingrained within the culture of conduct of this organization. The best evidence of such is the fact that the stickers with which they plaster street lights and bus stations are often intentionally laced with razor blades, which is obviously done with the sole intention of injuring the street sweepers and others who remove them. However, the most telling and cynical of all incidents is one that should have gained more attention even abroad.
Les otages peuvent enfin sortir de l'enfer, se mettre à l'abri.
In 2015, after the Charlie Hebdo and Hypercacher terrorist attacks, a massive police investigation was conducted in Koulibaly, the French Islamist who had brutally murdered French Jews in a kosher supermarket. It soon became very clear that he must have planned his attack and bought the weapons for it in France. The investigation found that he had bought the weapons used in his attacks illegally from a member of Generation Identity. This revelation, the subsequent trial, and the 7-year prison sentence passed on him were widely covered in French and German media. There is irony and cynicism behind the fact that an organization that proclaims itself to be the savior of Europe and Western civilization from threats such as Islamic terrorism and positions itself as a vanguard of protecting people from that threat has in fact itself contributed to such an attack taking place in a European city. All of this draws an image of an organization that at its core is at the very least questionable, deeply dishonest about its intentions and goals, fascistic and even dangerous. It managed to establish itself firmly within political discourse online in the English-speaking world, and even being embraced or openly supported by many an online political commentator. You will consequently find them at free speech rallies, as speakers in supposed defense of the very values they themselves have agreed to destroy, as a supposed legitimate political response to an Islamist threat that they themselves have actually even contributed to, and as a supposed traditional conservative youth movement, adherent to democratic principle in defense of democracy from leftist authoritarianism, while in fact having ties and direct support to the very ideology who seek to undermine and destroy those very values, under the pretense of at the very least having a common enemy in the far left, and by willfully or out of laziness not bothering to take an in-depth look at this organization, its record and goals. Online conservative commentators and many other political activist figures have prostituted themselves to an organization that in the end is the very opposite of the free marketplace of ideas that they claim to stand for. If you solely define yourself by what you are against rather than what you are for, you will end up selling yourself out to those who are even worse than what you initially opposed.